Hi everyone, this is future Brady here, just introducing this episode. This is episode 2 of the Unmade podcast, but it's actually the first episode we made. It's like a pilot episode. We were just testing everything out, testing how our systems worked, and I think the plan wasn't really to release this one, but listening back we thought, it's kind of fun, and you might enjoy hearing what our very first ideas were. So here we go, our second episode, which is our first episode, which is our second episode. I'll be back at the end of the show with another quick message, but here it is. This is The Lost Pilot. Look, I've got something. I got that especially for you.
Really?
That's going to be my Tim bell.
Right.
Because I know you're going to say things and do things that upset me all the time, and whenever you do, I'm going to ring the bell to stop you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
It's like, I want a Pavlovian sort of dog response. I want, whenever you hear that bell, I want you to cower and apologise.
I apologise already.
I'm under the impression, but I don't know if this has been sort of communicated between us, that the first podcast idea we're going to pitch to each other is like a slightly more serious or legitimate one, and then maybe a bit of a more out of left field one second. Is that the idea you had, or are you just going to give me something ridiculous?
I have so many good ideas that I don't mind. I also have some things written here that don't really make sense. In between all these good ideas listed here and some crazy ideas, I just have the words "interview with the vampire." And I don't know where that's going to go, but it's there on the list.
I think that one's been done, man. That's been done.
It has been done.
Let's have your first official idea. Tell me your idea.
Okay, at the top of the list, and it's that may not be the best. This is sort of a batting order, a good opener. Is called "What a Coincidence." This is a podcast that I think is going to give what I think people find the most amazing thing in conversations and the most enjoyable things to hear in conversations. I'm starting with the best, and that is coincidences, amazing coincidences.
Oh, I'm angry at you, man. Do you know why?
Why, man?
Because I let you go first, and now you've completely ruined my first idea. I think we're going to have to merge them in some way, but you give me your pitch first. You had the courage to go first. You get the glory. Tell me about What a Coincidence.
I think coincidences are glorious moments in life. And I think people will listen to any story that is as boring as anything if there is an incredible coincidence that concludes the story or features in the story somewhere. So my podcast, What a Coincidence, does several things. It explores coincidences. However, I think there's more to it than that. I think there's also room to talk about the very nature of coincidences. There are some people that believe there are no coincidences.
Yes, I know some people who would argue that.
Right. And either those are there because either, because they believe there's some outer force that's controlling things, or just because we're predetermined to seek out situations that are similar and to remember them and reverberate with them.
We are pattern recognition machines. That's basically what humans are. So whenever we see a pattern or see a coincidence, it sticks out, whereas they're happening all the time and they're not happening all the time, and we just identify them.
That's right. But that means that coincidence is happening. It's just mean that we remember them and enjoy them because we're designed to do so.
Well, how are you defining a coincidence then? What is it? What is the definition of coincidence? In fact, you don't have to do that. A dictionary can do that, can't it? Let me look at what a coincidence is.
I imagine it's something along the lines of two or more occurrences of a similar nature.
It says here, a remarkable occurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection.
Uh-huh.
Now, remarkable, again, is a word that needs defining, because who decides what is worthy of remark? But I think you and I are probably on the same page with coincidences. In the podcast, What a Coincidence, is it going to mainly be about what I would call marquee kind of awesome coincidences, like the person who was on both the Titanic and the Olympic when, or is it going to be things like I went to buy tea bags at the shop and I got there and my mum was there as well, also buying tea bags? I mean, is it going to be like everyday coincidences, or is it going to be like what I would call like celebrity coincidences?
Some coincidences are only enjoyable for one person, and that's the person that they happen to.
Yes.
And so they're not, I wouldn't say they're objective coincidences. They are subjective coincidence. They're things that we enjoy. And my mum's life, for instance, has 40 of those a day.
Yes.
And she enjoys every one of them.
And tells you every one of them.
And that's exactly right. But I think it's also enjoyable to hear those big rock star ones.
Yeah.
Because those ones, they're the sort of ones that I know, like you're the friend that I always had who knew those. And so I knew, you know what I mean? You will have read them somewhere and I enjoyed hearing them. And in fact, they're so enjoyable that they're enjoyable to hear more than once. So even when you'd bring them up again, playing a game of Trivial Pursuit, oh, by the way, and this would, it's like, even though I know what you're about to say, because I've heard you say it before, coincidences are so much fun that I look forward to you saying it again just to hear it, because you get to enjoy the coincidence of it again and you sort of beam and enjoy it. So there's something objective about them, and there are the big rock star ones. So I think every episode would have a couple of those bigger ones that have a maybe take a bit longer to explain or have some rooting in historical grand moments or moments of significance.
So is the format like, say it was two presenters, each one brings a coincidence to the table and tells the story, and how do you analyse each coincidence that is featured in What a Coincidence? And by the way, if you're having a shot of vodka every time we say the word coincidence, you must be hammered by now.
Absolutely. I think you could actually move through themes. In other words, you could have a whole episode on wartime coincidences. You could have a whole episode on Eiffel Tower coincidences. Coincidences that relate to the Eiffel Tower happened in or involved the Eiffel Tower within. You know what I mean? Just the Eiffel Tower just features in stories. Whenever I'm watching something, the Eiffel Tower turns up. So an example of that is the other day we were watching a documentary on the Statue of Liberty, and the person who designed the internal skeleton of the Statue of Liberty is Eiffel, the man who...
Yeah, Gustave Eiffel, yes.
There you go. So, but he just turns up everywhere. So what I'm saying is you could have Eiffel Tower coincidences. Two lovers met at 4:00 and then they met at 6:00 and, two other lovers met at 4:00 and 6:00. Those sorts of stories.
It's not a coincidence, but I do love that Buzz Aldrin's mother's maiden name is Moon.
That's great. But and so you can have people on to talk about coincidences, something that's happened to them, but you would have to make sure it's not a feared subjective coincidence. It has to be an objective coincidence. I haven't told you my favourite coincidence story. Can I tell you my favourite coincidence story?
Is it a rock star one, or is it a...
Well, you can decide. It's not my favourite story that's happened. It's the one that's happened to me.
Go on.
I'll tell you very briefly.
Yep.
I was giving a seminar one day. A guy who was coming along who I didn't know, but who had heard of me, was keen to see me and was talking with his father over breakfast about how he's going to this seminar to hear Tim, and he was really looking forward to it. The father was only tangentially aware of me, but that all happened in the morning. I did the seminar all day long. I finished the seminar and it was raining, and I went outside and I got on my scooter and I rode off into the city on my scooter, and I was right over the other side of the city, and I came up behind a car and went to turn left and slipped on some oil. My scooter whacked into the back of this car. No, I was not injured. I came off fine, but it was a bump and a scratch, the sort of thing that you have to exchange numbers and sell. Oh, I'm sorry, gentlemen. Yep. So he comes out and he says, "Oh, what have you done?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." And because of the rain and because of the traffic, I just gave him my business card and said, "Give me a call, I'll fix you up for it." And the man looks at my business card, looks back at me, and then an hour later, we drove off, an hour later he calls me and says, "You wouldn't believe this, but at breakfast time this morning, my son said he was going to hear you in a seminar today." So that's a coincidence, isn't it?
That's not bad. That's not bad.
He hears about me at breakfast, and then at the end of the day, I crash into his car.
Yeah. Okay. One I can tell quickly that you reminded me of is when I was working at the newspaper in Adelaide. I once had to phone someone up for an interview, and I said, "Oh, hi, this is Brady Harron, blah blah blah." And the woman said, "Is this Brady Harron from the Advertiser?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "My husband and I saw your byline on a story in the newspaper about a week ago, and we liked it so much that our son, who was born a few days ago, we named Brady."
Oh, that's a lovely story.
Thank you, man.
The coincidence factor is lowered by the fact that the newspaper is so broadly popular. But that's true. It is. But you called them, is that right? They didn't call you.
I called them, and it was completely unrelated to anything to do with their baby or anything. It was just, I don't even remember what it was.
So them hearing of you is not that amazing but them naming
because I was kind of a big deal, yeah.
That's right. I mean, babies were being named after you all left, right and centre in Adelaide at one stage.
Yeah. Oh, I said, what a coincidence. You're the third person today who's said that to me. Now, coincidentally, my first idea is not dissimilar.
Right.
my idea was a podcast I wanted to call Blue Moon, a podcast about rare occurrences. Blue moons themselves being rare occurrences, of course.
Yeah.
One of the ideas I had, because I quite like my gimmicks, and one of my ideas I had about this podcast that discusses rare occurrences is that it is only ever released on the day of a blue moon.
No, that's good.
Which I think is cool, except when I researched when blue moons happen.
Oh dear.
And sometimes you can go a year without a blue moon.
All right.
So that kind of brought me undone. So then but sometimes you can get 2 or 3 in a year. So, and there are different definitions of what a blue moon is. My favourite definition of a blue moon is when you get 2 full moons in 1 month. Because normally you only get 1 full moon per month, but sometimes you get an extra full moon at the end of the month. And that's one of the things that can be called a blue moon. So my idea was maybe you could release episodes of Blue Moon only on the days of a full moon. That could be your gimmick, because then one comes out every month, but the day sort of changes, and people will have to look up like the lunar calendar to find out when their next episode of Blue Moon is coming out. So I quite liked the game of that.
Right. But that's the quirky concept behind. It's not actually about blue moons, is it?
No. But it's about things like blue moons. It's about phenomena that are rare. So if you go into websites, you can look at things like this. Like there are all these sort of special kinds of clouds that happen that you only very rarely see in your life, like a lenticular cloud, or it could be things like weird, like sundogs, weird phenomena that happen in the atmosphere. You can go to whole websites about them. Or it could be things like those times when it rains frogs, or people who have been hit by lightning and things like that. So it could be natural things like, a transit of Venus, which only happens every 100 or couple of 100 years. Or it could be human stories of things that not necessarily a coincidence, but are rare and unusual. I don't know. Do you get like identical quadruplets and things like that? Just strange things. You could also have a section in this podcast, in addition to having like your guest topics that you want to discuss, you could also have like rare events in the news. So since the last full moon, Tim, what else has been happening in the world? Well, Brady, as a matter of fact, in China there was a man who was born with 8 arms or something like that. And so you could have other rare events that are topical. You could bring in like a serious section, like with your idea. You could have like the serious section where someone comes in and says, well, in fact, the actual odds of that happening are, or you could have like a statistical breakdown, like how rare is that occurrence? I say a transit of Venus is rare. Well, as a matter of fact, you get, 9 every 370 years. And so you could have like a breakdown of it. You could have guests who have been, the subject of a rare occurrence. Today we've got Bill Bloggs, who was hit by lightning or something like that and lived to tell the story.
So it's less the coincidence, but it is more it's the rarity of the things that happen. They're spectacular and they're rare.
Yeah. Things that are rare, like a blue moon. So, yeah. That's what it is. Blue Moon, a podcast about rare occurrences.
Most of the examples that you've given are from the natural environment.
That's because I'm a science geek.
Yeah. That's less of interest to me, but some...
Yes.
I was listening carefully, but I was waiting for an example that wasn't about the natural environment.
It could be things like assassinations of US presidents. Is that a rare occurrence? How many have happened? There have been however many. How many have there been? 4 or something?
Funny you should say that, because on the news last night, I was hearing that it's actually it's a higher death rate than just about anything else. So it's... You think about the ratio. I think it's 11%. 11% of the presidents have been killed.
Yeah, well, there you go. But that would be like a twist episode of Blue Moon. I got more into the idea of the name and the release schedule than I did into really drilling down into the content of the podcast. But I think it would be a fertile topic, perhaps even more fertile than coincidences. I think just coincidences would feature on Blue Moon. So I think my idea should swallow your idea,
right,
and just become a subset of my more awesome idea.
That's right.
So what do you think? What do you like better out of Blue Moon and What a Coincidence? I think Blue Moon's a cooler title.
I think that's true.
But my title doesn't do what it says on the tin, whereas your title does do that.
That's right. I think mine is more immediately appealing, but I think yours may be more of a slow burn, and it may have, particularly if it's well researched.
Blue Moon, a podcast about rare occurrences. It needs mine needs its little subheading. Otherwise you don't really. That's the strength of your title. But I do think What a Coincidence is a bit like, it's a bit flippant. It sounds a bit like a new game show on Channel 7. Hey, it's What a Coincidence with Larry Emder.
Yeah, I know.
Whereas Blue Moon, I think, has got a little bit of cool edginess to it. A good name for your podcast might be Serendipity.
That's true.
Because it's everyone's favourite word anyway, serendipity, and it kind of means coincidence. And I would listen to a podcast called Serendipity before I listen to a podcast called What a Coincidence.
I think serendipity sounds a little bit, I want to say airy-fairy, but that's not enough. I would be worried that it would be slightly mystical.
Yeah, that's true. It would sound like it was made by someone who's really into crystals.
So I was going to say the same thing, someone with incense burning while they recorded it. And
hey everyone, welcome to Serendipity. I've just got the feng shui just right, so I think we're about ready to record now. This is the second half. This is where I feel like we have license to be a bit more creative, maybe put ideas out there that aren't necessarily going to work, but hey, blue sky thinking, man. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Let's test that theory. What do you got?
Okay, I'm still looking at several here and deciding which one to give you. My podcast, this is really ridiculous. We'll talk about it very briefly and then we'll move on to yours, okay? I should have gone with something else. My podcast idea is called Baldwin.
Right.
And it follows in patient detail the work and lives of Alec, Daniel, William, and Stephen Baldwin.
Okay.
So this is now this is how I came to think about this. Alec Baldwin has a fantastic podcast called Here's the Thing, and he just interviews people, and he has a wonderful voice, and it's really interesting. That got me thinking, yeah, Alec Baldwin he's a nice guy, and I'm thinking about what films has he been in. I went through, and they're quite diverse films that he's been in.
What's your favourite Alec Baldwin film?
My favourite Alec Baldwin film would have to be Glengarry Glen Ross.
Definitely, mine too. Oh, he's not in it. He's not in it for very long, but he pretty much steals it, doesn't he? He
does. But that's a film I watch annually. I love it.
Yeah. He's done some good ones. That Hunt for Red October.
That's true. I forget that he's in that, isn't it? So Alec Baldwin, and so I got thinking about him and the things that he'd done, and I thought, well, how interesting that he'd do a podcast.
Yeah.
And I got thinking about the others, and it's slimmer pickings after that. But I was thinking, what if you were, like, who's following these guys that closely? Stephen Baldwin is in The Usual Suspects, which is a very good film, and the highlight of his work. I don't know anything that Daniel Baldwin was in.
Right.
There's Elvis podcasts, and there's podcasts about the Beatles. What if you were to follow these guys and actually follow them so closely you'd follow and have an episode exploring the artistic productions of the Baldwin brothers?
There is actually, I'm just looking, there is a 1996 television documentary made for E! True Hollywood Story about the Baldwin brothers.
Wow, really?
Called The Baldwin Brothers. So,
well, that's essential research right there.
Are there any other Baldwin siblings that aren't a member of the Baldwin brothers? Or are all of them Baldwins? Are there any? Is there a brother who just became a doctor, or is there a sister? I don't know.
There's Daniel who draws a blank.
But he acts.
Does he?
No, I think he's an actor too.
See, we need this podcast. I think the world needs, because I think other people have these questions as well. What are the Baldwins doing?
Daniel's an actor, director, producer. Alec, obviously. William, obviously, is probably the second most famous. And Stephen is also an actor, director. But yeah, is there another? I'm trying to find out now.
A secret Baldwin, like a mystery Baldwin.
The hidden Baldwin. You could hold that back to episode 10. We've sent out researchers and we believe we found another Baldwin. They're not even the Baldwins themselves know about.
But imagine getting one of the Baldwins on there just to talk about their life, talk about the details, real details.
Get them all on. Get one on a week and then get them in every possible permutation. So the first 4 episodes, you interview Alec, then Daniel, then William, then Stephen.
Yeah.
And then episode 5, you do Alec and Daniel, and then you do Alec and William, and then you do Alec and Stephen, then you do Alec and William and Stephen, but not Daniel. Because then you get all those different dynamics have been tried, and you find out which dynamic works the best.
Yeah, that's right, because they can comment on each other, and they can give their perspective on the top 3 things done by the other brother, which brother they find most annoying, which one they find they love, which one do they secretly think.
Oh, hang on a second, man. I think I could potentially have some dynamic information here. Well, first of all, we could also do spouses. I mean, Kim Basinger was married to Alec Baldwin.
Absolutely.
But It looks like they may be Baldwin sisters. I'm looking on under the Baldwin family on Wikipedia, and it seems there are sisters called Elizabeth and Jane Anne.
There's a lot there. They're layers.
I initially was skeptical, but now I cannot believe this podcast doesn't already exist. How do you think the Baldwins would feel about this if it was unauthorized? Do you think they'd shut us down if we started it, or do you think they would appreciate the fandom? Or I mean,
you'd be honoured, wouldn't you? Really? I mean, surely. I mean, it would be more publicity than a couple of them have received in a little while.
That's true. Could you have a special episode where you just talk about other people called Baldwin? For example, there's another actor called Adam Baldwin who's not related, but he was in Full Metal Jacket, and so you could have like today we've got something a bit different for you people. It's Adam Baldwin. He's not related to the Baldwins, but
there are 6 of them here. They're a family of 6, and they have sisters Jane and Elizabeth. Oh, no, and then Carol is the matriarch who's alive. Oh, I don't know if she's alive now. She's alive in the photo in front of me. It would be...
You know people can die after photos are taken, don't you?
She's alive, but she's here, so she existed. There was a mother.
So you're saying they did have a mother, basically.
They did have a mother. They weren't spawned by some Baldwin machine, some Baldwin factory. They're just pumping out dozens of them everywhere. There could be Baldwins everywhere. There are so many Baldwins that of course 4 of them would become famous. That's just bound to happen mathematically.
It's not what a coincidence. It's just inevitable statistics.
I remember seeing a documentary where a guy wanted to confront a racist, and the way he confronted the racist was to get some of the Ku Klux Klan members' DNA and then some of his own DNA, and he was able to show that the Ku Klux Klan member actually was from Africa. And so it was like really confronting. Oh gosh, I'm African myself. But actually, the truth he let us in on at the end of the documentary is actually that all humans have African DNA. So all humans have some traces back to Africa in their DNA, and that's just like a little trick for his documentary.
Yeah.
And I'm actually wondering what our relationship is in relation to the Baldwins. In other words,
maybe we are just full-blown Baldwin brothers, and we were taken away at birth.
We're all Baldwin brothers. We're all brothers. We're all Baldwins.
I don't think we're Baldwins, man. We're not as handsome as the Baldwins. Who's the most handsome Baldwin?
Oh, I think Alec Baldwin is the original.
But is that just because you know him better? Like, is he objectively more handsome, or did he become the most famous because he's the most handsome? Or there are questions to be answered here. I'm trying to find a picture of all 4 of them.
Those are good questions.
I think William might pip Alec for being slightly more handsome.
You're more of a William man?
Maybe. I don't know. It's definitely between William and Alec.
I reckon the younger they get, the more goofy looking they get. I think Alec has his features in proportion, and then their sort of eyes get droopier the younger they get. And
look, this is a whole episode of the Baldwin podcast, man. Like, just a whole episode dedicated to like their looks. Which one's better looking? I think we could probably sustain an hour just talking about which one's better looking.
I think there's...
I'm actually beginning to worry we will sustain an hour about which one.
We've talked more about this than we have about the other 2 ideas. There is a lot to it.
What about a podcast called Brothers, where just each episode is about a different collection of famous brothers, or like siblings and do sisters and brothers, and like rather than trying to milk the Baldwin cow for 20 years, you could do
the Baldwin dynasty. I think is the there is something about that as to brothers and sisters. I mean, this has a tangential relationship back to coincidences, the way that brothers and sisters choose to act and live their lives, and the decisions that they make, and the fact that they all end up in... We probably know of the ones that are celebrities because they're in show business, but there's something there about the way that brothers and sisters may choose vocations.
No, Tim, hang on. You're taking a good idea and making it boring now.
Sorry.
By like making it a study of like brothers and sisters and stuff. You got to stick with like, you know, celebrity brothers and sisters.
I wish I was a Baldwin.
All right. All right. Do you want my idea?
I do. I think we really do.
This is the idea I've given the most thought to, which is really sad, and it's gone through several name iterations. But I want to say from the start that it's going to involve me saying a word, which is not a rude word, and it's not a swear word, but it's just a word I find unpleasant and I don't like saying, but I'm about to have to say it quite a lot.
Right.
And that word is fart.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a nice word, is it?
It's not a nice word.
What are farts called in your house?
Fuffers.
Fuffers,
yeah.
Right. Fuffers is a good name for the podcast too. I'll put that to one side. So initially the podcast was going to be called Celebrity Farts, but then I changed it to Fartcast, and now my preferred name is Flatology, which I learned last night is the word for the study of flatulence.
This is a real thing.
Yeah.
It is one of those that needs to be explained, but please explain.
Well, initially when it was just going to be called Celebrity Farts, the idea was that you would play a fart that had been done by a celebrity guest, and people had to like figure out who that was. So it would be like, so okay, here's today's celebrity fart, and play the noise, and then it turns out it was like Tom Hanks or someone, it would become a really big deal. Like, oh, I can't wait to see who they have on Celebrity Fart this week. A bit like, car share karaoke. If it became big enough, I could imagine all the celebrities would be lining up to get on it. They've got a new movie out, so you've got to get yourself on Celebrity Farts. Otherwise, that's just what you do when you're trying to publicise something, because it's like the biggest podcast in the world. So you can tell I was thinking a bit outside the box here. and I was being a little ambitious. But then when I moved away from just being about celebrity farts and just making it a general fart cast or flatology or fuffers, you could share stories about farts and people's experience. You could go into the science of flatulence, which is really interesting. You could look at farts in culture, which would be a special subsection called fart work, where you would look at farts in like movies and television and like paintings and comics, and because they use a lot in comics and that. The viewers could get really engaged, and they could send in like audio of their own farts, and you could play them as well. You could talk about some of the unpleasant sides of it. You could talk about the medical side of it. I think there's a really rich thing. You could talk about, there are these people called flatulists, who were like people who were like entertainers who had very good control of their farts.
When you say when, like how long ago?
Well, I think it was like a thing in the 1800s. It's still now, but it used to be like a thing, in the sort of more freaky show.
The Barnum, yeah.
Yeah, here's the Elephant Man, and now here's a flatulist who can play Amazing Grace with farts or something. But you could look at the serious science. You could look at global warming and this whole thing about livestock and flatulence. You could look at health. I think it would be a monthly podcast. I don't think you'd do it weekly. What do you think?
I think Fart Work is the better name.
Fart Work?
I think that's a good name. I can't think of why someone would listen to it. I really can't. I
don't know. It would be funny. Like if I said to you, Tim, this podcast actually exists and I've been doing it for 6 months. Here's a link. Would you go and listen to an episode?
Look, I would. Like it has novelty value. There's no question. It's like, no, really. Has someone really done that? And so you look it up, and so it would, and so you'd listen to it, and I feel like you'd sort of listen and you'd giggle and you'd go, this is crazy, that's hilarious, for about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then I feel like you'd be over, because it's not enjoyable. It's absolutely hilarious when someone farts. You know what I mean? In a situation that is embarrassing. But the thing that makes it hilarious or interesting is the formality of the occasion. There's nothing funny about a fart that happens when everyone's relaxing or trying to fart. The funny ones happen when it's the Queen, or it's, you know what I mean? Someone, I don't know, a bunch of giggling people talking about funny farts. You would have to set up a context that made the farts funny, or the podcast would have to take an air that was higher than its station to give it a sense of humour.
Exactly. Yes. I'm not saying it should be a couple of teenagers just like making raspberries and giggling. Like I thought I very much just outlined all the different ways it would have like a seriousness to it, and in a way, the irony of how serious it's been taken is the beauty of it.
That could work.
Obviously, it's a stupid idea, and it's never going to get made. And it's probably the worst idea for a podcast we will put out there, and yet I'm strangely drawn to it. Flatology. I think calling it I think that's why the name Flatology is a funny name for it too, because it sounds so pompous and like it takes itself so seriously.
Yes. I mean, okay, I'll give you this. You having mentioned those different categories, I would genuinely like to know the answer to some of those questions.
I want to know when you're sitting around trying to fart.
I'm not... I'm thinking
you
about...
said, no, it's farts aren't funny when you're sitting around trying to fart. I'm like, when are you sitting around trying to fart?
Well, if you have a particular dinner party and everyone knows that's what you're there for.
I think the biggest problem for flatology, among its myriad problems, that will stop it ever being a thing, is there's no prestige associated with listening to it. Like, you're never going to tell your friends you're into it. Like, oh, have you heard that podcast about farts? It's actually really good. Like, you will get very little word of mouth because people aren't going to want to recommend it. Even if they like it, it just seems like a thing you wouldn't recommend. Oh yeah, I listened to this podcast about farts, and so it's actually surprisingly funny and informative. And once a month, they always have something different I wasn't expecting.
That's true. It's a guilty pleasure.
Yes.
I'll tell you about coincidences. This is another coincidence. I was at lunch the other day.
What a coincidence!
This is a coincidence. I was watching an episode of Friends, and it featured Ross, who is a paleontologist, talking about it. The next morning at lunchtime, I didn't bring it up, but someone else brought up paleontology. And so we had a big conversation about paleontology. That night, I went to another meeting, which had a dinner beforehand. On the other side of town, totally different people. And I asked a person sitting next to me what they're doing, and they said they're going on a trip because their husband's gotten into paleontology. And we had another long conversation about paleontology. And it was like paleontology 24 hours for me. That's a coincidence.
Man, that shows to me why you are not the man to produce What a Coincidence.
I think something like this should happen. Something like that would happen once or twice in a century, surely.
Forget the transit of Venus. I just had 2 conversations about paleontology and watched Friends last night. It's Future Brady here again at the end. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying the Unmade podcast. We've got more to come. If you'd like to support us, the absolute best thing you can do is keep listening, subscribe on things like iTunes and all your podcast apps. Apparently leaving a review and a star rating's good for us as well because it helps other people find us in searches. You can catch us on YouTube. You can subscribe there as well. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com/unmadefm. So if you want to go the extra mile, you can go there and have a look, and we're going to try and make that worth your while on Patreon. That's it for now, but we will be back again soon with more ideas for the Unmade podcast.